Question is that the amendment be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's always very pleasing in these debates to follow the member for Port Adelaide, because there are very few members in this place, Deputy Speaker, that have the expertise that he does, because he comes from the state of South Australia, where they conducted a grand experiment. This grand experiment that was backed by the member for Port Adelaide from start to finish. And that experiment, Deputy Speaker, was a 50% renewable energy target. And what did that deliver, Deputy Speaker? It delivered that state the highest electricity prices in the world. It would take a special type of incompetence to deliver an Australian state the highest electricity prices in the world. But that is exactly what they managed to achieve in the member for Port Adelaide's home state. And yet, Deputy Speaker, you would think this would be a lesson. You would think we would learn and look and say, look at South Australia, look at the terrible mistakes that they made. Look how they punished South Australian residents. Look how they had record numbers of South Australians that had their electricity disconnected, Deputy Speaker. You think they'd learn. But no, that is actually the official policy of the Australian Labor Party, to actually copy that failed experiment and to take it nationwide, Deputy Speaker. Everyone in the country should be terrified of the prospects of a Labor Party getting into office and inflicting that failed experiment on everyone. Of course, Deputy Speaker, we know that the other expertise that the member for Port Adelaide has, and his expertise also goes to his predictions about the outlook for thermal coal, Deputy Speaker. It was only last year the member for Port Adelaide was standing up on the ABC and telling us all about the rapid decline in thermal coal. In fact, Deputy Speaker, he said, and I quote, he said, "Indeed, the demand for thermal coal exports from Australia is actually in decline." What a great prediction, Deputy Speaker, because this year we've had record exports of thermal coal. Deputy Speaker, I would tell you, if the member for Port Adelaide told you it was raining outside, you would need to go and check. He should be employed by the bookmakers at Randwick, Deputy Speaker, to give them the tips, because then they know which horses to lay off. Wrong time after time after time, Deputy Speaker. And here he is again on this bill, completely wrong yet again. And Deputy Speaker, this bill, I put it to you, is a litmus test. It's a litmus test of whose side are you on. Well, I'll tell you on this side, Deputy Speaker, we are on the side of the old age pensioner that hasn't been able to afford to heat their home in winter and sits in a cold home at the risk of their health. That's whose side we are on. We're on the side of the working family in Western Sydney that struggles and can't afford to turn the air conditioner on a hot summer's day. We're on the side of the small business owner that has seen their electricity prices, Deputy Speaker, increase 100% under the Labor Party. We're on the side of the tradesman, the truck driver and the farmers of this nation. And by their opposition to this bill, Deputy Speaker, we know whose side that the Australian Labor Party on. They are on the side of the large energy companies, giving them aid and comfort to engage in anti-competitive activities to the detriment of Australian consumers. They are on the side of the inner city Greens, Deputy Speaker, that cheer and celebrate every time the price of electricity rises. That's whose side the Labor Party is on. And they have form in this, Deputy Speaker, because last time that they were in office, Deputy Speaker, they willfully increased the price of electricity 100%. They knew, Deputy Speaker, that their carbon tax would almost double the wholesale price of electricity. And yet they came in here and they voted for it. And we had to fight every single day tooth and nail to get rid of that carbon tax, Deputy Speaker, to take the pressure off wholesale electricity prices. And yet, Deputy Speaker, they still persist with a policy in energy that the Business Council of Australia has said would put a wrecking ball through the economy. A wrecking ball through the economy. And that is the policy that they bring to this House, Deputy Speaker, and that is what they argue for. Now, Deputy Speaker, I've heard members on the other side during this debate say how terrible sovereign a divestiture power is and how much of a sovereign risk it is, Deputy Speaker. Well, divestiture powers have been part of the competition law or antitrust law in the USA for over 100 years, Deputy Speaker. They go back to the Sherman Act of 1890, not 1990, 1890, Deputy Speaker. The home of free market capitalism, USA, has divestiture powers. Now, for anyone to come in here and say, oh, divestiture powers are something you have in a Marxist Venezuelan economy, they simply do not know what they're talking about. Because we've seen members of the Labor Party actually celebrate that Marxist Venezuelan economy. Many members of the Labor Party, Deputy Speaker, actually signed an invitation to none other than Hugo Chavez to come to Australia and to preach his Marxist policies to Australia about how wonderful they were. That's where the Labor Party stands, Deputy Speaker. We are doing nothing than taking a divestiture power that has been in the United States of America for over 100 years and applying it in a very narrow section of the economy, our electricity sector, Deputy Speaker. And the idea that divestiture power somehow or other harms shareholders, Deputy Speaker, is not borne out by the historical facts. The most famous case in the USA of divestiture was with Standard Oil. 1911, Deputy Speaker, Standard Oil was broken up into 34 separate companies. So what happened? If you're a shareholder, previously you had one share in Standard Oil. You now had, after the divestiture, 34 shares, one in each of the 34 separate companies. And history has shown, very quickly after the companies were, Standard Oil was broken up into those 34 different companies, that one share in 34 was worth a lot more than just one share in Standard Oil. So this idea, it is somehow or other, Deputy Speaker, taking away assets or government confiscation of assets, is something that people actually have no idea what they are talking about. And yet, Deputy Speaker, they come in here and wax on about sovereign risk. The greatest sovereign risk that this nation faces is the possible election of a Labor government. The second greatest sovereign risk, Deputy Speaker, that this nation faces is internationally uncompetitive electricity prices. Unless we have competitive electricity prices in this nation, manufacturing businesses across the entire economy will not invest. And yet we have a Labor Party that deliberately, a deliberate intent of their policies is to increase the price of electricity. Now, Deputy Speaker, it's also divestiture powers are also a feature in the UK competition law as well. Now, why are such powers needed here in Australia? We have a situation, Deputy Speaker, we have seen the result and what happens to electricity prices in South Australia when they chased the Northern Power Station out of town. Substantial rises in the wholesale price of electricity. We saw the same thing in Victoria, where the Hazelwood Power Station, although, Deputy Speaker, being old, was chased out of town by the tripling of coal royalties. When Hazelwood closed down, Deputy Speaker, we saw an 80% increase in the wholesale price of electricity. And although that was bad, Deputy Speaker, for consumers, that was great news for all the big electricity companies. If you are in an industry where the market price for what you are selling or the service or the goods that you are supplying to that market increases 80%, Deputy Speaker, it's happy days. So while consumers were harmed by the closure of Hazelwood, every other electricity generator in the country was able to make hay and to make record profits at the expense of pensioners and hard-working Australian families and small business owners, Deputy Speaker. Now, we have a situation coming up where we have the Liddell Power Station possibly to close in 2022. AGL told us that it has no value. They value it at zero. That's why they need to close it down, because it has no value. Yet, we find out that they knocked back an offer to buy Liddell from a competitor for $250 million. $250 million offer was on the table, Deputy Speaker, and they said no, because it's worth more to them to be able to close it down. And why is that? Because they have such a dominant position in the market, they have such a large market share, that by closing Liddell down, Deputy Speaker, they can keep the wholesale prices inflated and they can make more profits at the end of the day through higher wholesale prices from their other assets. That, by any definition, is anti-competitive conduct. And our competition laws, if they are not strong enough to catch that anti-competitive conduct, Deputy Speaker, they need to be amended. I've had long arguments, Deputy Speaker, with the Chairman of the ACCC. I thought there was a strong case under our existing competition laws to take action against the possible shorting of supply that was being proposed. The Chairman of the ACCC said he didn't believe the current laws were strong enough. That's why, Deputy Speaker, these provisions are needed. And they are needed, Deputy Speaker, and they are no different, Deputy Speaker, to the provisions in some of the other countries. Look at the provisions of the Sherman Act in the USA. A per se violation, Deputy Speaker, is a breach of the Sherman Act. And I'll quote from a document. It says, these violations meet a strict characterisation of Section 1. A per se violation requires no further inquiry into the practices, actual effect on the market, or the intentions of the individuals who engaged in the practice. Conduct characterised per se unlawful, which has been found to have a pernicious effect on competition, or such conduct would always or almost always tend to restrict competition and to decrease output. That is what, Deputy Speaker, we need to ensure that we have provisions. In an essential service like electricity, if a generator decides to decrease their output, to raise prices to the detriment of consumers, we need divestiture powers similar to the home of free market capitalism, the USA, Deputy Speaker. And of course, Deputy Speaker, the UK competition law. How would such shortening of the market go there? Well, under Article 2, Deputy Speaker, of the UK competition law, it says conduct may constitute an abuse of a dominant position if it consists of, and lists various ones, number B, limiting production to the prejudice of consumers. If we have electricity retailers in this country limiting production to the prejudice of consumers, Deputy Speaker, we need provisions to say that is anti-competitive and with a threat of divestiture, just as they have in the USA and just as they have in the UK. And Deputy Speaker, while we're on the subject of a 45% emissions reduction target, I would hope someone from the Labor Party would explain to us what they are going to do in the transport sector. What are you going to do in the transport sector to get those emissions reductions? What plans do you have that you are not telling the Australian public? What plans do you have that you are hiding? We know what it was last time, Deputy Speaker. We know a carbon tax is recommended by the Climate Change Authority of $135 to reach Labor's target. That would push the price of petrol up at the bowser for petrol and diesel 40 cents a litre. Now, I hope the member would at least no longer hide and
Order.
tell us
The member's
what are you going to
time
do
has
in
expired.
transport